Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So this time we will continue our discussion sa conceptual framework. So we'll go to the chapter 2 of the conceptual framework entitled, wait lang, okay, entitled the conceptual framework for financial reporting. Okay, so our learning objectives as of today is first is to state the purpose, the status, and scope of the conceptual framework, state the objective of financial reporting, identify the primary users. Actually, na-discuss na nila last time ang mga primary other users of financial statements. Explain briefly the qualitative characteristics of useful information and how they are applied in financial reporting, and define the elements of financial statements and state the recognition criteria and their recognition. Okay? So, for sure, balaan nyo na gid niya kung anong mga elements of financial statements: the asset, liabilities, equity, income, and expenses. Okay, so state the measurement basis used in financial reporting. Okay, so before we go to the purpose of conceptual framework, i-review ko lang nga hambal ko last time that the conceptual framework is like the backbone of the accounting. When you say of backbone, di ba? Ang backbone, ang purpose sa body ta is to support the overall or the whole body na ta. So the same with this conceptual framework pag abot sa accounting. It's like a backbone that supports the overall standards ng mga preparers ng financial statements. Okay? So, okay. So, what is the purpose of the conceptual framework? So, the conceptual framework prescribes the concepts for general, take note of this, the general purpose financial reporting. Okay? So, its purpose is to, first, take note of this, assist, okay, the IASB in developing standards that are based on consistent concepts. Okay? Next, assist, di ba? Ma-assist siya ko, no? Kay sino? Sa preparers. Sino mga preparers? Ang mga accountants. Okay? In developing consistent accounting policies when no standard applies to a particular transaction, and another is to assist also, okay, all parties in understanding and interpreting the standards or the users of the financial statement. Okay, so kung mapansin nyo kulain nga highlighter. Okay, so kung mapansin nyo nga ang conceptual framework, ang pinaka-purpose niya lang niya is to assist. Okay? Assist ang gaobra sang standard, assist ang nag-prepare sang financial statement, which is the accountants, and assist ang users, the primary and the other users. Okay? So what is the status of the conceptual framework pag-abot sa accounting? So the conceptual framework, take note, is not a PFRS, meaning conceptual framework is not a standard. Okay, so when there is a conflict between the conceptual framework and the standard or the PFRS will prevail. When you say conflict, for example, may mga hindi maintindihan pag-abot sa standard, between sa standard kag sa conceptual framework, always kaya ma-prevail ang standard. Okay? So in the absence of a standard, management shall consider the conceptual framework in making its judgment in developing and applying an economic policy that results in useful information. Yes, for example. Okay, so lang ha. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so in the absence of standard, management shall consider the conceptual framework in making its judgment in developing or applying an accounting policy. So kung may mga ga-exist ng mga for example, ang management will decide to create an accounting policy and wala sa standard, so they can consider sa conceptual framework in making their policy. Okay, so next. Okay, so the conceptual framework is concerned with, take note, general purpose financial reporting. So wala siya nag-focus sa special or specific na purpose ng financial reporting. Always lang siya nag-focus sa general purpose financial reporting. Okay? So some of this na-discuss ka na, So to shorten the discussion, so may mga part nga. hindi ko na i-tackle. Okay? So the conceptual framework provides the concepts regarding the following. First is the objective of financial reporting. The qualitative characteristics. So later, isa-isang tanin. The qualitative characteristics of useful financial information. The financial statements and the reporting entity. Okay. The elements of financial statements, the recognition and the recognition. Okay, so ano mga elements? So, balaan nyo naman na the recognition and measurement. Okay. And presentation and disclosure, concepts of capital and capital maintenance. So isa-isang ta. So what are the objectives of general purpose financial reporting? Okay, so the objective of general purpose financial reporting is to provide financial information about the reporting entity that is, of course, useful to primary users in making decisions about providing resources to the entity. Mostly sininiya nga mga information is quantitative and financial in nature. Okay, so the objective of a general purpose financial reporting is the foundation of the conceptual framework. Okay, so ang mga primary users na discussed last time, when you say primary, the existing and potential investors, the lenders and other creditors, and okay, ang mga other users like the government, the employees, the customers. Okay, so only the common needs of primary users are met by the financial, of course. Okay, so diretso. What are the qualitative characteristics na ginahambal sa conceptual framework? Okay, so first is the fundamental qualitative characteristics, which is first, okay, fundamental and enhancing qualitative characteristics. So under the fundamental qualitative characteristics is first the relevance. Okay, when you say of relevance, okay, ano yung ambot silingon sang relevance? Meaning sang relevance nga ang whether ang transaction or ang account is ibutang mo sa financial statement or hindi. Okay? Kay base kung dulaon mo siya, base may effect siya sa overall financial statements. Okay? So when you say of relevance, before siya ma-consider nga relevant, kinanglan first may ara siya sang ginatawag nga predictive value or ang iya nga future value or the feedback value, okay? Or ang iya nga historical value. Okay, so materiality, entity specific aspect of relevance. When you say of materiality naman, depende sa kadakuon sang amount. Okay? Almost the same sila sang relevance. Okay? Kay kung dulaon mo sila sa financial statement, it's either may dako sila nga effect sa mga users sang financial statements if dulaon sila. But ang difference between relevance and materiality, so ang materiality aga focus lang sa sa kadakuon sang amount. For example, ang 1,000 pesos sa aton, which is dako na pag-abot ya sa mga big companies, ang 1,000 pesos is medyo immaterial. But when you say of relevance, wala siya gatanaw sa value, but rather gatanaw ya ang relevance sa kung sa amount rather. But ang relevance siya focus siya more on the substance, right? More on the value rather than the amount. Okay? So for example, sa aton, di ba ang 1,000 wala lang. Sa mga big companies, ang 1,000 is are immaterial. But when we say of theft, kung kinkawat dabi na sa mga dagko nga companies, okay, or may theft nga natabo sa ibang nga companies, maski 1,000 pesos lang siya, as long na theft, okay, or kawat sa inside their organization, gina-consider sa Japan nga relevant maski gamay ang amount. Okay, so amo nang difference between the relevance and materiality. Next fundamental qualitative characteristics is faithful representation. So when we say of faithful representation, okay, may mga specific ni siya mga characteristics. Paano ko na ito nabalaan nga ang financial statement is faithfully represented. Okay? First, kung may ara siya sa ginatawag nga completeness. Okay? Ang financial statement is considered as faithfully represented if, number one, ang financial statement is complete, meaning all the relevant information, all the necessary information is na disclosed inside the financial statements. Next is neutrality. When you say neutrality is unbiased, okay? So wala siya may ginapanigan, wala siya when you say of wala siya may ginapanigan. For example, mag-prepare ka sang financial statement as accountant So kung makita mo yang nga loss or deficit ang isa ka company, you need to declare nga deficit siya. Okay, you need to tell the truth nga deficit siya or hindi siya sang or wala siya income. Okay? Hindi kaya magpati sa management nga i-change mo ang income para lang maging correct or maging nice ang ila financial statement. Okay? So dapat wala kaya bias mag-umbra ka sang financial statement. And last, when you say of faithfully represented, kinanglan free from error. You say of free from error, ang mga accounts or transactions na ginsulod mo da sa financial statement is siya, wala siya sang hindi siya sang understated, hindi man siya sang overstated. Okay, when you say of free from error, wala siya sala. Okay, almost the same na siya sang truth, okay? Truthfulness. Okay? So kinanglan before ta makahambal ang financial statement is faithfully represented, kinanglan arin ang tatlo, ang completeness, ang neutrality, and free from error. Okay? So maliban sa fundamental qualitative characteristics, may ginahatag pagid si conceptual framework nga ginatawag nga enhancing. Okay? When you say of enhancing naman, ay gina-enhance niya ining mga fundamental characteristics. Ining fundamental, yaga focus ni siya more on the financial statement. Pero ang enhancing niya, enhance niya ining mga qualitative characteristics or mga fundamental qualitative characteristics. So what are the enhancing qualitative characteristics? Number one, comparability. When you say of comparability, ang financial statement mo, may ginatawag siya nga consensus. Ang financial statement nga gin-prepare sa isa ka company, dapat almost the same na sa iban nga financial statements nga gina-prepare sa accountants. Kay balik ta to sa ginahambal sa conceptual framework, aga focus ang sa general purpose financial reporting. Okay? So next, verifiability. When you say verifiability, ang mga accounts or ang mga amount na ginbutang mo to sa financial statement is quantifiable. Okay? Meaning ma-verify mo siya bala nga ining ang amount nga cash, kay ang cash nga amount is kung i-check mo sa bank is tama or ma-verify mo sa bank nga ang cash on hand or cash in bank sa ang company is minagid man. Okay? Timeliness, when you say timeliness, kung ga-prepare ka financial statement for the year 2019-2020, kinanglan ang mga data or information nga ibutang mo dito sa financial statement is naka-anchored man sa 2019 or 2020 nga mga transactions. Okay? And last, nga enhancing qualitative characteristics is the understandability. Okay? You say understandability, pag tanaw mo sang financial statement, ikaw nga may knowledge ka sang ginatawag ng financial statement, maintindihan mo siya nga daan. Okay? Ang pinaka-common nga example sini, ang gina-prepare ta nga financial statement sa Philippines is naka-English. Okay? Naka-English alphabet. Okay? Kaya amo na siya ang aton way nga mas maintindihan naton nga financial statements. Okay? So fundamental versus enhancing. Okay, the fundamental qualitative are the characteristics that make information useful. Okay, ano nga mga information ang ara sa financial statements. While the enhancing qualitative characteristics, gina-enhance niya ang usefulness of information. Okay, gina-enhance ito ang mga fundamental para kung i-present mo ang information, okay, mas maging pagid siya, mas maging useful. Okay, amo nang purpose ang enhancing qualitative characteristics. Okay? Relevance ang bagay. Information is relevant if it can affect the decisions of users. Muna hambal ko ginako ang omission or hindi mo siya pag-declare sa financial statement, may effect siya sa decisions ng aton nga mga users. Okay? So relevant information is the following. Kagina ang predictive, the information can be used in the making predictions or sa future. Or pwede ka makakreate sa ginatawag ng forecasting. While ang confirmatory value, the information can be used in confirming past predictions or mga historical values. Okay, materiality. Okay, information is material if omitting stating or obscuring, it could reasonably be expected to influence decisions that the primary users of a specific reporting entity's general purpose financial statements make on the basis of those financial statements. Tama naman ko gina. Ang materiality, ga-focus siya mostly sa amount. Okay? While ang relevance, ga-focus siya sa value. Okay? So materiality is a matter of professional judgment. Okay? Faithful representation. Faithful representation means the information provides a true, correct, and complete depiction of what it purports to represent. Okay? Like the financial statement. Yan balik ko kagina. Okay? So, gin-discuss ko na completeness, neutrality, kag free from error. Okay? So, you can copy na lang siguro if you want. Okay? So, the enhancing qualitative characteristics, saraman ang comparability, the verifiability, timeliness, and understandability. Okay, gin-discuss ko man. So, you can copy na lang if you want. Okay, kaya I'll try nga i-shorten. Okay? Kaya kung masyado kahaba ang klase, medyo boring na rin. Okay? Objective and scope of financial statements. Balik na ganun siya, no? So, ang objective of general purpose financial statement is to provide financial information. Okay? Primarily, okay, financial in nature, gina siya, diba? About the entity's assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expense. Okay, that is useful in assessing, number one, the entity's ability to generate future net cash inflows and management stewardship over economic resources. Okay. So, financial statements in the reporting entity, continuation, So, financial statements are prepared for a specific period of time. Itong hamal ko. Kung ga-prepare ka sa 2019 nga financial statement, kinanglan ang tanan nga information within that 2019 nga year is complete or ara dira. Okay? And include comparative information for at least one preceding reporting period. Okay? So, what do you mean when you say comparative information? Kami, ng mga accountants, when we prepare financial statements, usually, mag-prepare kami na 2 ka tuig na. Di ba? Ma-prepare kami dabi isang 2019 nga financial statements. Kinanglan may ara na siyang ginatawag na comparative, which is ang 2018 na financial statements. Going concern, bala niya ng going concern. Okay? So, reporting entity. A reporting entity is one that is required or chooses to prepare financial statements and is not necessarily a legal entity. So, it can be a single entity, sole proprietorship, a group, corporation, or partnership, or a combination of 2 or more entities. Okay? So, elements of financial statements. Balik na ni sinyo. Okay? Balaan nyo na eh. Anong element of financial statements? The assets, the liabilities, the equity. Okay? So, this relates to the entity's financial position, while the income and expense represents or relates to the entity's financial performance. Okay, so what is an asset? An asset, is a present economic resource, take note of this, controlled by the entity as a result of past events. An economic resource is a right that has the potential to produce economic benefits. Okay, anong important ng term na controlled? Okay, it does not mean na owned mo ang isa ka asset, automatic asset mo na siya. Or owned mo ang isa ka property, automatic asset mo na siya. Kinanglan may ara sa kita na ginatawag nga controlled. Okay? Control lang over an asset is a good indicator na nga ina nga property is asset or asset nimo. Okay? 3 aspects. Okay? Right. Okay? So asset refers to a right and not necessarily to a physical object. The right to use, to sell, to lease, or transfer a building. Okay? Next, potential to produce economic benefits. Yes, before mo siya makonsider nga asset, kinanglan balaan nimo nga inang property nga na or inang asset nga na is makaproduce sang benefit pag-abot simo. Hindi siya mag-produce losses. Kaya ma-produce siya sang benefit towards sa imo nga business. So the right has a potential to produce economic benefits for the entity that are beyond the benefits available to all others, such as Okay, what is important is that the right already exists in that in at least one circumstance, it would produce economic benefits for the entity or makaproduce siya sa ginatawag na income. Okay? Control. Control means the entity has the exclusive right over the benefits of an asset and the liability to prevent others from accessing those benefits. Okay? Now, what is a liability? Okay, pinamalta liability, bali sa una, utang. But no, hindi lang siya utang. Liability is a present obligation of the entity to transfer an economic resource as a result of past events. Okay, anong mga important nga terms? Obligation. Before ma-consider ang liability as a liability, kinanglan may ginatawag na obligation. Okay, anong obligation? A duty or responsibility that an entity has no practical ability to avoid. Or kung sa law, or kung may-ari na kamulo, dumayari na kamulo, di ba? Obligation and contracts. What do you mean by obligation? It is the necessity to do no or not to do, okay? To act or not to act, diba? Munang obligation. Okay? Transfer of an economic resource. Yes. Anong transfer of economic resource? May, di ba, kung may utang ikaw, may-ari ikaw nga payment. So, economic resource mo ang money. May transfer of money from the debtor and the creditor. Okay, the obligation has the potential to require the transfer of an economic resource to another party. Such potential need not be certain or even likely. Okay? It would require the transfer of an economic resource. Hindi mo na siya ma-consider nga nga liability if wala sang transfer of an economic resource or payment pag-abot sa utang. And present obligation as a result of past events. Okay? Anong past events? The entity has already obtained economic benefits or taken an action, or as a consequence, the entity will or may have to transfer an economic resource that it would not otherwise have had to transfer. Okay? So, next, executory contracts. So, an executory contract is a contract that is equally unperformed. Okay? Neither party has fulfilled any of its obligation, or both parties have partially fulfilled the obligations on equal consent. Okay? When you say a contract, okay, di ba, ang contract, it is the a binding agreement between two parties, di ba? So when you say of executory contracts, okay, meaning ko nung ano ba niya? Equally unperformed, okay, or both sa party wala pa maka-perform sang obligation nila towards that contracts, okay. So, an executory contract establishes a combined right and obligation to exchange economic resources. For example, ako, may nag-utang sa akon, di ba? So, ako, pag ang nag-utang sa akon, so mayroon kami ginatawag nga executory contract nga siya, bayaran niya ko, and ako, pulmon ko siya, money. Okay? So, the contract ceases to be executory when one party performs its obligation. Yes. Kung ako, naghatag na ko money siya, so wala na siya, hindi na siya ma-consider as executory contracts, kaya na-execute na namon. Okay? Meaning sang na-execute na perform na namon ang contract. Okay? Ang bili na lang is ang binding nga liability sa iya kag ang asset sa akon. The entity performs first, the entity's combined right and obligation changes to an asset. If the other party performs first, the entity's combined right and obligation changes to a liability. So, ang ginhatag ko siya nga money, magiging liability. And ang ginhatag or ang ginpahulam ko siya nga kwarta, magiging asset na kon. Kaya magiging receivable ko siya, magiging liability or payables sa iya. Okay? So what is an equity? An equity is the residual interest in the assets of an entity after deducting all its liabilities. So, ang other terms nila is ang net worth. Okay? Net worth. Income and expense. What is an income? Income is an increase in assets or decrease in liabilities that result in increase in equity other than those relating to contributions from holders of equity claims. Okay, so I think sa inyong senior high kag basic accounting in discuss niya. Okay, so an expenses are decrease in asset or increase in liabilities that result in a decrease in equity. Okay, so opposite man na sila nga duha. Recognition. When you say of recognition, di ba, ang balaton, gina-recognize na siya whether ang account is an asset, liabilities, or equity. When you say of the recognition, ginadula mo na siya or dulaon mo na siya sa aton nga financial statements. Okay, the recognition is the process of including in the statement of financial position or statement of financial performance. Okay, so this involves recording the item in words and in monetary amount. That's why naga-debit credit kita, naga-journal entry kita. And including that amount in the totals of either of those statements. So, paano mo mabalaan nga ang isa ka account is kinanglan mo i-recognize. First, kinanglan na-meet niya ang definition sang asset, liability, equity, income, or expense. Tama, atong definition ta sang asset, liability, or equity, income, or expense. Once nga na-meet niya na, pwede siya natin ma-consider as or pwede siya natin ma-recognize sa financial statements. Okay? And recognizing it would provide useful information which is relevant and faithfully represented information. Okay? So, hindi siya sang immaterial. Okay? So, ano naman ang relevance? Okay? Sige lang. So, faithful representation. So, the level of measurement of uncertainty in other factors can affect an item's faithful representation, but not necessarily its relevance. Okay? So, measurement, uncertainty means exists if the asset or liability needs to be estimated. Anong mga gina-estimate ng mga account? The depreciation, di ba? The allowance for doubtful accounts. So, a high level of measurement uncertainty does not necessarily lead to a non-recognition of an asset. Meaning sina, kung hindi mo siya ma-measure, it does not mean nga hindi mo na siya pag-recognize. Okay, kaya may ginatawag kita nga estimation. Okay? Provides relevant information is clearly and accurately described and explained. However, measurement uncertainty can lead to a non-recognition of an asset if making an estimate is mabudlay or hindi siya natin ma-estimate. Okay? What do you mean when you say the recognition? Okay? The recognition is the removal, okay, dulaon ta na siya, sa previously recognized asset or liability from the entity statement of financial position. The recognition occurs when the item ceases to meet the definition of an asset or liability. Kung adto siya, mga ton account is wala niya na na-meet ang definition sang asset or liability. For example, sina, kung nadulaan ka na sang control over that certain asset, so pwede ta na siya ma-derecognize. Unit of account is the right or a group of rights, the obligation or the group of obligations, or the group of rights and obligation to which recognition criteria and measurement concepts are applied. Okay? So, mga kuha naman niya. Mga tawag dito, definition. Okay? Measurement basis, na-discuss na naman last time kung anong historical cost, the fair value. Okay? So, review nyo na lang to. Okay? Parin mo ko ng historical cost. Okay? The historical cost ko ng asset is the consideration paid plus the transaction cost. While ang liability is ang consideration received to incur the liability minus the transaction costs. Okay, tandaan nyo lang na siya ng mga terms. Okay. Fair value, na-discuss naman, is the price that would be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction between market participants at the measurement date. Okay? What is important there is a fair value is may ara siya sang ginatawag ng market participants. Okay, sino ang mga market participants? Atong mga buyers kag mga sellers. Okay? Value in use, mga definition na lang guys ha. So the present value of the cash flows or other economic benefits that an entity expects to derive from the use of an asset and from its ultimate disposal. So ini nga mga term later, magamit na siya sa mga different nga chapters. Ano? So, very important nga familiarize nyo nga dahil yourself sa ini nga mga term. Okay? Present value of cash or economic resources that an entity expects to be obliged to transfer as it fulfills a liability. Okay? The current cost. Okay? Discuss na naman ang current cost ng ligad. Ano? So, an asset is the cost of an equivalent asset at the measurement date, okay, comprising the consideration that will be paid at the measurement date plus the transaction costs. Okay? So, review nyo lang ang inyong basic accounting. Entry values, current cost and historical costs are entry values, while ang value in use and fulfillment values are exit values. Okay? Later, sa usually niya ang mga current cost kag historical cost magamit sa PPE. Okay, ining mga exit values magamit ani sa mga inventories later. So familiarize nyo na lang sa yun ang daan. So when selecting a measurement basis, it is important to consider the following. Number one, the nature of information provided by a particular measurement basis, okay? And the qualitative characteristics, the cost constraint, and other factors. Measurement of equity, okay? Equity is not actually measured, no? So when you say of equity, dabe, assets naton, i-minus ang tasang aton nga liabilities, automatic muna na siya ang equity. Okay? No duway man siya masyado gina-measure. Usually na gina residual interest bala, no may terms lang residual interest ano. Okay? So presentation and disclosure. So information is communicated through presentation and disclosure of or in the financial statements. Okay? So effective communication makes information more useful. Tama. And effective communication requires, number one, focus ka lang sa presentation and disclosure objectives and principles rather than on rules. Okay? Ga-follow ka. Kay din sa standard usually, sa standard na ginhatag sang PFRS or IFRS, kumpleto na da kung paano mo i-present kag paano mo i-disclose ang certain nga account. So follow mo lang na siya. Okay? And classify information by grouping similar and separating dissimilar items. And aggregating information in a manner that it is not obscured either by excessive detail or by excessive summarization. Okay? The objectives are specified in the standards. So, banda, hindi naman needed. Okay? So, classifying means combining similar items and separating dissimilar items. Kung, for example, cash and cash equivalents. So, under sa cash, later, mabalaan nyo na, ang cash gali naton is hindi lang yung bills in coins. So, ang aton cash, sari-sari na da, may mga sari-sari na da, like the petty cash fund, the payroll fund, okay, the cash in hand, the cash in bank. Okay, so, kay total similar items sila, pwede mo sila ma-combine. Okay, under sa ginatawag nga cash and cash equivalents nga account. Next, offsetting of assets. Take note of this. Offsetting of assets and liabilities are generally not appropriate, or meaning offsetting of assets and liabilities are not permitted, okay, or is not allowed unless permitted by a standard. Okay, later may mga certain cases kita nga ang offsetting gina-allow, pero in general bawal mag-offsetting. When you say offsetting, asset naton minusan ta lang sang liabilities, i-present siya as net, bawal na. Okay? So separate mo gid siya account, i-present mo gid siya as asset, and i-present mo siya as liabilities. Okay? So, aggregation, okay? Added together of asset, liabilities, and equity ano. Okay, last, okay? Financial concepts, capital. Capital is regarded as invested money or purchasing power. Capital is synonymous with equity, net assets, and net worth. While ang physical, capital is regarded as the entity's productive capacity, units of output per day. Okay? So, if anything, may question ka mo, so chat or sa post lang ka mo to or ask ka mo sa akong PM. Okay? Thank you.